In 399 BC, an Athenian court voted to execute the wisest man in the city for the crime of asking too many questions. Plato was there, or near enough. And watching a democracy kill Socrates broke something in him that never healed. Here is what most people don't realize: Plato didn't hate democracy because he loved tyranny. He distrusted it because he had watched a majority, swayed by clever speakers and wounded pride, put reason itself on trial and lose. If you have ever wondered why the loudest, most confident people so often end up in charge, and why that feels so wrong, Plato had already named the problem 24 centuries ago. In this video we will examine his most provocative claim, that power should belong to those who least desire it. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe. Every video here is built around an idea worth your time. He wrote his answer in a book called The Republic, around 375 BC, and the phrase that made it famous was deceptively simple: until philosophers rule, cities will never rest from evil. Plato gives us an image in Book 6 of The Republic that lands harder than any argument. Picture a ship where the sailors quarrel over who should steer, each convinced he deserves the helm, none of them having studied navigation. They flatter the shipowner, drug him, seize the wheel, and treat the true navigator, the one who actually watches the stars and the seasons, as a useless dreamer. That, Plato says, is how cities choose their leaders, which means we reward the appetite for power rather than the competence to use it well. What makes the image so uncomfortable is that navigation is a genuine skill. You would not want a surgeon chosen by popularity, or a pilot elected because the passengers liked his speeches. And yet with the hardest craft of all, governing human beings, we routinely hand the helm to whoever wants it most and argues most persuasively. Plato's point is not that ordinary people are stupid. It is that steering a state requires knowledge most people never pursue, because pursuing it is slow, difficult, and unrewarded. Therefore the natural navigators get pushed aside by those who master the easier art of being liked. This is why he thought good governance and popular approval tend to pull in opposite directions. But this raises a harder question: if not the popular, then who, and how would we ever recognize them? This is where almost everyone gets Plato wrong. When people hear philosopher-king they imagine an aloof academic, buried in abstractions, unfit for the messy work of actual rule. That picture inverts what Plato meant. His philosopher is defined not by cleverness but by orientation, a love of what is true and real rather than what is flattering or profitable. The Greek word philosophos means lover of wisdom, and Plato uses it almost literally. In the Republic he describes such a person as someone who cannot be bought, because they already value something money cannot touch. Someone who will not lie for advantage, because they have organized their whole soul around not deceiving themselves first. This is why, for Plato, the qualification for rule is moral before it is intellectual. Honestly, this is the part that convinces me. Plato isn't proposing that we install the smartest person we can find. History is full of brilliant tyrants. He's proposing something rarer and more demanding, a ruler whose desire for truth is stronger than their desire to be right, to be praised, or to win. Such a person governs the way a doctor treats a patient he doesn't especially like, for the patient's good, not the doctor's ego. And yet a doubt appears immediately. If these people love truth more than power, wouldn't they be the last to seek office? Plato saw that objection coming, and his answer turns the whole problem inside out. Plato argues, in one of the most counterintuitive passages in political thought, that the very people fit to rule are the ones who don't want to. In Book 1 and again in Book 7, he says the true philosopher would rather spend his life contemplating truth than managing the disputes of a city. Ruling, for him, is a burden, not a prize. Which means the best possible ruler must be, in a sense, compelled to serve. The logic is sharper than it first sounds. If a person seeks power for the pleasures it brings, wealth, status, the thrill of command, then they will use power for those pleasures, and the city becomes a tool for their appetites. But a person who values something higher than power will use power only as a duty, held lightly, surrendered gladly. Therefore reluctance is not a flaw in the candidate. It is evidence. Here is the line that has stayed with me. Plato writes that the greatest punishment for refusing to rule is being ruled by someone worse than yourself. So the good govern not from ambition but from a kind of grim responsibility. They take the helm because they cannot bear to watch the incompetent steer. I'll admit I assumed this was pure idealism when I first read it. I was wrong. Every honest board, jury, or committee you've ever trusted worked on this principle. The people you actually want in charge are the ones who take no joy in the power, only the outcome. But how does someone become that kind of person? Plato thought it took a specific and brutal education. The famous allegory of the cave, in Book 7, is really a description of what leadership costs. Prisoners are chained facing a wall, watching shadows cast by a fire behind them, mistaking those shadows for the whole of reality. One is freed. He climbs painfully toward the sunlight, is blinded, adjusts, and finally sees the world as it is. That ascent is the philosopher's education, long, disorienting, and impossible to rush. But Plato does not let his freed prisoner stay in the sun. The crucial move is that the enlightened one must go back down into the cave to help the others. And when he returns, his eyes no longer suited to the dark, he stumbles. The prisoners laugh at him. They say the journey ruined his sight, and they conclude that leaving the cave is dangerous. Plato adds a chilling detail: if they could, they would kill anyone who tried to free them. He was, of course, thinking of Socrates. What this reveals is that true leadership is not a reward for the leader. It is a return to the darkness on behalf of people who may resent you for it. The one who has seen more owes something to those who have seen less, even when they don't want the gift. This is the passage I reread when I feel cynical about public life. It reframes the whole question. The point was never that philosophers deserve to rule. It was that they, of all people, are obligated to. And that obligation leads directly to the hardest demand Plato makes of us. Strip away the ancient setting and Plato leaves us with a standard we still use every day, usually without noticing. When you distrust a leader who seems to enjoy power a little too much, that instinct is pure Plato. When you trust the colleague who takes on responsibility reluctantly, competently, and without needing credit, again, Plato. He gave language to a judgment your gut already makes. The original thesis of the Republic, then, is not a proposal for an actual government run by professors. Scholars still debate whether Plato meant the ideal city literally or as a mirror. I lean toward mirror. The deeper claim is a test you can apply anywhere. The fitness to hold power is measured by how little you crave it and how much you serve something beyond yourself. This is why the loudest self-promoter should worry us, and why the person who has to be persuaded to lead often leads best. Not because reluctance is charming, but because it signals that their loyalty is to the work, not the throne. Appetite for command and competence at command are simply not the same thing, and Plato's whole political philosophy hangs on refusing to confuse them. Which brings us to the uncomfortable part. Because this test does not only apply to the leaders you follow. It applies to the small kingdom you already rule, your work, your family, your own choices, and it asks a question you can act on tonight. Plato's argument comes down to this: the right to lead belongs to those who love truth more than power and take up authority as a duty rather than a prize. So here is the practice. First, before you accept or grant any responsibility, ask one question: am I seeking this for the outcome, or for the feeling of being in charge? Second, judge every leader by the same rule: watch what they do with power when no one is applauding. Third, be, in your own small domain, the reluctant navigator, competent, honest, and willing to serve even when the cave laughs. The person fit to rule is the one who would rather not, and does it anyway. Philosophy is not an academic exercise. It is the art of living well. Subscribe if you want to keep at it. And if you want something concrete to take with you, there is a free Stoic starter kit in the description, 20 timeless quotes, a 7-day routine, and a printable journal. Any books mentioned today are also linked below.